Welcome back to A Shark's Perspective. So, what do you do when life gets in the way of your journey as a marketer slash speaker? Like a lot of people, you'd run to Google the answer, but not every answer is there. And how, when you're navigating that path, do you decide on what are the right types of speaking engagements for you in order to build your brand? Melanie Deziel is the founder of StoryFuel, an international keynote speaker, a lifelong storyteller, and is recognized as one of the world's leading experts in native advertising and branded content. And on this episode, we'll discuss life as a speaker and marketer, how pregnancy can affect speaking, content marketing, storytelling, Dominic and the Fast and the Furious, and a lot more. So let's tune in to a storytelling marketer with a shark who loves to tell stories on this episode of A Shark's Perspective. Melanie, thank you so much for joining us today on A Shark's Perspective. If you would, tell us a little bit about your career and your background to date.
Absolutely. So my background has taken a bit of a winding turn, but I started out as a journalist. That's what I studied. I always wanted to be sort of uncovering injustice and finding the truth and, telling these incredible stories. I was a storyteller from the very beginning. I found that I had a really hard time actually finding a job in storytelling, a job in journalism when I graduated. And so I put those same skills to use in the world of branded content. So I worked for the New York Times, for Huffington Post, and for Time Incorporated, teaching their brand partners, their advertisers, how to tell stories in a way that was going to resonate with our audience. So, kind of bridging that gap between journalism and marketing. And then I found that people really need those skills. It's very, very sought after in the marketing world.
Yeah.
And so for the last 4 years, I've worked on my own. I founded a company called StoryFuel. And through corporate workshops and speaking at conferences and my forthcoming book, I'm trying to share those storytelling skills from the world of journalism with as many marketers and storytellers as possible.
So I heard you on another podcast that resonated with me for completely different reasons, but it triggered, my own thoughts and my own story. And I'd been a speaker quite a few times over the years and had dialed a lot of that back for, again, lack of a better word, how, sometimes life gets in the way, but it was, due to some family health issues. Granted, yours was completely different. Again, family health issues, but you got pregnant, had a baby. I'm hoping the baby's doing wonderfully. But
She is.
she is. I was walking through Boston one day on the way to a conference, listening to your podcast interview on the Speaker Lab, and it was really I'd listened to several episodes, but it was one of my favorite because it just sort of triggered memories of what happened with my own parents. But it was about the time you were due, and you had just started, piecing together that part of your career. When you look at being a speaker today and as a marketer, what have you learned since then, now that you start this? I don't know if you'd necessarily call it a 2.0 in your mom career, but how did you sort of look at that with, what were the lessons you learned since moving into motherhood and now relaunching your career?
Yeah, so this was a really interesting transition for me. And for background for the folks who may not have heard that interview, what I was sharing is that I was sort of at the peak of my speaking career. I was getting, the best ratings I had ever gotten. I had a killer keynote that I was really comfortable with. I was getting tons of inbound business requests. And then my husband and I, we decided we wanted to start a family, and timing was right for that. But it's tough to balance those two things, especially as a woman. You hit a point where you can't travel anymore. You're not supposed to get on a plane when you're a certain size, and
Mm.
so I had to stay home. And that was right about the time that I did that interview. So at that point, I was really headed into this unknown. And now, so I imagine that interview was probably about 6 months ago. So our daughter is 3 months old now, and I'm still figuring it out. I wish that I had a magic wand I could wave, or a special potion I could share on how to
Yeah.
figure all of this out. But I don't, to be honest. I'm still figuring this out day by day. So some of the things that I've learned, number one, is that everyone loves a picture of a cute baby.
Yeah.
And so, if you're blessed enough to have that be your reason for pressing pause on your business and having to come back, then getting to share, the adorable new project you've been working on definitely helps to kind of start those conversations again. Don't be afraid to share that, if you're comfortable. The other thing that I learned is that it is really, really hard to do all of those things at once, to do everything. And I think we all know that on some level. You hear it from other people, but particularly if you're my assumption is that if you are a speaker or a marketer, you're kind of a self-starter in some way,
Yeah.
or an entrepreneur. You're very capable. You have a lot of faith in your ability to figure things out, right? And what I discovered is that new motherhood was a project unlike any I had ever seen. So I didn't actually know how to navigate it as much as I thought I might. And so there was a
Hmm.
lot more learning, being gentle with yourself in a way that is probably not comfortable, and not being afraid to ask for help. I've asked for more help in the last few months as I've been figuring all these things out than I ever have before. I was the kind of person who would learn how to code and then learn how to use a website, and then build my own website and edit my own videos. I wanted to learn and do everything myself. And that's just not feasible when you have another person's care as your responsibility, whether that is, your aging parents, or a partner, or one of your children, or anything else. It's difficult to make that many things a priority, and so you'll find that you need to ask for help, and you need to choose very carefully how you spend your time.
Well, you talked about just like going to do searches on things to search for advice, and you couldn't find it.
Well, yeah, and that was the challenge. I mean, and I think, at the risk of being very, very vulnerable here, I think there were times where I thought, if I can't find any, female speakers who have had kids while they were in their careers. I found many speakers who had, teenagers, many speakers who had young children, but I couldn't find advice on how to be, what do you do when you're pregnant and you're a speaker? How do you take that time off? How do you plan around this? How do you bring a newborn? Can you bring a newborn with you to a gig? How do you negotiate your contract to include the fact that you'll be traveling with a young baby? I couldn't find those resources. And so for a brief period of time, I remember feeling, is this even possible? Maybe the reason there's no resources for this is because I'm a total fool for thinking
Yeah.
I can do both at the same time. And maybe anyone else who's tried never made it full circle to write the advice blog post. Like maybe they just, went up in flames, and there's no hope for me, right? So I think, it was a little scary at that point, and I think I still don't know why some of those resources aren't out there. I think it's something that I hope I can create some resources around when I've fully
Yeah.
resurfaced and have the bandwidth to do so. But I think I need to learn a little bit more before I'm ready to share my learnings with others.
No, you're not. You just give advice like everybody else does, and yours is going to be a lot more right than most of the other people who are out there giving advice. But when you transition, I'm going to back it up then because I wanted to ask you about your career in coming from the journalism world into this entrepreneur, content marketer, storyteller role. When you first got into this, what was the need that you were trying to specifically fill when you decided to set up shop, open a business, and start
Mhm.
reaching out to get clients? Were people coming
I
to you and talking to you and saying, "Hey, you should start, opening this up. We'd love to bring you in as a consultant," or did you put your flag in the sand and say, "Here's what I do," and come hire me?
I think it's a little bit of both, actually. So in my previous role, like I said, I was really blessed to work for some really big media companies.
Yeah.
Time Incorporated. You may be less familiar with Time Incorporated, who's since now been broken apart and absorbed. But Time, they have Time Magazine, of course,
Right.
but they also have People, Sports Illustrated,
Yeah.
Entertainment Weekly, Fortune. There's some really big brands. So it's a wonderful company to work. Wonderful brands to get to work with. And same thing for the New York Times, of course. So when I was working with those media brands, I was being invited to speak fairly frequently on behalf of my team, on behalf of my company, on
Hmm.
behalf of our clients. So that's really how I got my start, was with a company behind me. It's a wonderful way to do it. And oftentimes people, maybe not necessarily understanding who I was there representing, would ask if I do consulting. Do I do corporate trainings? Could I come teach their team how to do the same thing? And of course, at that point, I was under non-compete. I couldn't go teach our competitors how to do the same things we were doing beyond what I could share on stage. So I kind of kept hearing that sort of feedback of people saying, I want to learn more from you. I want to hear more from you. And I didn't necessarily have a way to do that at the time. And so what I found is, my last role was at Time Incorporated. I had been there for about a year. And I had the realization that each of my previous roles, I had worked there for about a year when I hit a point where I had taught all I had to teach. and I had sort of worked myself out of a job, so to
Mm-hmm.
speak. I had trained people, I had set up infrastructure, and then there wasn't that much for me to do anymore because things were running smoothly. And I think it was actually my now husband at the time who said, "I don't think you're a job hopper. I think you're actually a consultant and you don't know it. I
Yeah,
think this is your specialty. You get
sure.
brought in, right, for this early phase. You set up all these systems, and then all systems are go, and you're ready to move on to a new project, a new client." So it was really his encouragement that, this is not a bad thing. This is actually a good thing, and you should be doing it more systematically. And that combined with the feedback from others saying, "Hey, I would like to learn more from you. I would love to have a workshop." Um, I hit a point where I put up my shingle and I reached out to some of those people and said, "I hope that you're prepared to follow through on that request because
Yeah,
I'm
really.
now available." I'm now available to give workshops and speak at conferences and do more of those kinds of things. And luckily, enough of them came through, and I was able to get things rolling. And my thing that I always share with everyone who's considering making that leap is to plan so far in advance and prepare for that. I think there's an instinct that you just want to sort of, brush everything off of your desk and stomp out of work in a a firestorm of some kind, and that's definitely not the way to do it. That transition for me was 6+ months in the making of preparing, of projecting, of reaching out to people, of making sure that I was ready to make that leap, and that my business, as it didn't yet exist, was going to be ready for me to make that leap. So it's definitely a really rewarding transition to make. You just want to make sure that you're prepared, financially, emotionally, physically, even to make that transition.
Well, not counting the last few months with having a child, and I know this is going to be an answer that you would have for both, but do you consider yourself more a marketer or a speaker? And then I've got a follow up as to why I'm asking
Hmm.
that.
I don't know that anyone's ever asked me to make that distinction before, so I'm not sure I have a great answer. But I think um, speaking to me is a means by which I deliver the same information as a marketer. So I suppose if I had to plant my flag somewhere, I would say I am a marketer and I deliver that information, as an educator to others through speaking, through writing, through a number of different channels. Um, but I do take my speaking craft very seriously.
Exactly.
I think we've all seen speakers at conferences who maybe they were forced there against their will by their team and they don't necessarily want to be there. Or maybe they're there because it speaks to their ego and they love being on stage and getting attention. But for me, it really is about the education. And I feel like it's my responsibility to study and rehearse and seek the advice of experts and coaches and directors who can help me master that craft so that I can more efficiently, educate others. So I don't know. That's a tough call. What do you think?
Well, and I look at it, I know a lot of people who use speaking as a lead generation business, obviously to get consulting, masterminds,
Sure.
other speaking gigs, all those kind of things that come into being, that form of an entrepreneur. But one of the things I've found so often at so many conferences and shows is while I don't know how many of them are held at gunpoint and requested to go speak, like you said, and I don't know that it's all, and maybe it is all ego, but there is an abundant number of folks out there. For example, I'll talk about content marketing and storytelling. It's very easy to see when you go hear, say, two different people. For the most part, it's very often easy to see which one really knows what they're talking about and which
Yeah.
one does not. And so many people leverage speaking to fill their ego without spending enough time on their marketing craft. And it also is part of the bigger problem where a lot of people are teaching others wrong. They may not know it, they may not have any ill intentions of it, but for a lot of people, and that's why I asked, how do you look at yourself and what you're doing? I think it's always sort of a question that people have to ask. I mean, I'm doing this podcast. I'm not a podcaster. I'm a marketer. I do
Right.
podcasting is some way to get the word out, but and I don't know that I necessarily think about it that much, but I just know that I've seen so many people, and I've watched online one of your sessions that you did at Content Marketing World, and it's very smart. The journalism part you talked about, it was so very smart. Your presentation was, and that's one of the things that made me want to speak with you. So that's the preface for the question and why I'm in it. But I'm sure you've seen that as well when you hear people talk about content marketing and storytelling, and they get up there and they don't have a freaking clue what they're talking about. So,
I think we run into that in all aspects of life, right?
oh
There's
yeah,
there's always people who are happy to talk if given the microphone, right? But I think to your point about, the podcast, I think for me, I really see speaking as a tactic. It's a means for me to deliver the same information. And it could easily be done through a podcast or a video series or a blog that was updated more frequently than mine currently is. But, that's a tactic that works really well for me. It's something that I'm very comfortable doing.
sure,
And I do really enjoy it. If
absolutely.
I'm going to make my mission to educate others, I might as well do it in the way that's not only effective but actually enjoyable for me. I think
Agreed. It
a podcast would be tough for me. I don't have that skill set at the
No,
moment.
I mean, speaking on a stage is a lot more enjoyable. However, doing a podcast is much more casual clothing. So,
It's true.
shorts and flip flops is. I'm not wearing a tie to or a suit to do a podcast. So,
Well, I like to talk about everyone has a first content language. You have sort
yeah,
of like a language of content delivery that's most comfortable for you. And, for me, I'm someone who enjoys speaking. I'm actually an introvert, which I think might be
yeah.
surprising to
No,
people since
that's
I get up on stage for a living. But, I find myself best able to express myself through the spoken word and through written word. So, for me, it's always going to be let's have a conversation on the phone or, do a podcast interview or hop on stage, or I'll write out a very well thought out email, guide, PDF of some kind. If I were to have to make a video, it would require so much more preparation. I'd really have to stress myself to think in a different way. And it certainly can be done. It's good to challenge yourself that way, but it's a lot more efficient for us as creators, as communicators, to lean into those tactics that, are really in our first content language. We're going to be way more efficient delivering information that way.
yeah. I mean, I'm with you. I'm happiest in the water, swimming with sharks. That's my extrovertness. I've been described by a friend as the most gregarious introvert they've ever known. For what I don't even know how to interpret that, but I would agree that most speakers, especially the good ones, are extreme introverts. So, when you look at your career and when you started moving into speaking, you just wanted obviously to get your name out there. How did you go from speak to anyone about anything versus about a particular topic, specifically storytelling, or what you focus on the most today and sort of that journalistic approach? But what made you realize that, and how did what was that journey like as you kind of got to there? Or did you even
So,
start at were you at World Peace for everybody, or did you start off with a singular topic?
no, I think, the first time I was asked to speak, I actually wasn't even presenting my own material.
Oh,
So that was
great.
an interesting experience. Well, not in a deceptive way. What I
Yeah,
mean
yeah.
is that I was at the New York Times, and our research department had come out with a report about social sharing,
Hmm.
about what makes people share content on social media. And someone from that department had been asked to present it at a conference, and there was a change of schedule or something. They weren't able to make it. Then my boss was asked if he could go and present that information, and he had a conflict.
Hmm.
So he said, "Well, Melanie presents at our client meetings all the time. She speaks to our clients in these environments and conference rooms and whatnot. I'm sure she'd be happy to go present that." So I saw it as really exciting, but it also meant that I had to read and learn and understand this research
Sure.
before I got on stage, because it was not my original thinking. It was not my work. So I think what that probably did for me, though, is it set the bar for me for what preparation for a gig looks like. So, there was a lot more learning, rehearsal, practice. I had practice questions. I did the talk several times, in front of groups of friends and coworkers to get the hang of it, because it was all new to me. And I'm actually really glad that it worked out that way, because it did set the bar that that's the level of preparation I need to show up fully for my audience, and make sure that I'm educating them the way that I promised I will. So that was good, but it did mean that once that gig was over, and I thought, oh, I'd like to do that again. What on earth would I say though? Because
Yeah.
this was not my material. So the good news is that I was at the time working at in T Brand Studio, which was the
Sure.
part of the New York Times that did all of our branded content. And that was really cutting edge at the time. People had a lot of interest in what we were doing. There was a lot of scrutiny on us, of course, because we're the New York Times. And, when you're that visible, people have a lot to say about the way you do things. So there was actually interest in what it was that my team was doing at the time. So I was able to say, hey, I've spoken at a conference before, which was now true. And I'd love to come talk about what we're doing here on this team, the way that we run, processes X, Y, and Z, how we accomplish results A, B, C. And there was enough interest in that, I was able to get some people on board to have me come speak and share those learnings. Same thing happened when I moved to Time Incorporated. I was able to again kind of pitch that I could come talk about, in a limited capacity, what our team was doing and what we were accomplishing with brand storytelling. And there was interest in that. So that definitely helped. I think the bigger transition probably was when I went out on my own. It's a lot, if you think about conferences you've been to, for those of you who are listening, they often tout the name of the company where the speakers come from, right? So we've got
Absolutely.
a speaker from Google. You might not even know who it is, but there's a speaker from Google or from Facebook or, from Ford or Coca-Cola, right? They give you those
It's
big
the
names
brand
and that's what
logos that
carries weight.
sell the brand logos that sell the sponsors.
Exactly right. And I wasn't coming with that any longer. I was coming as a representative of, at the time, I think, I made an LLC for tax purposes and it
Right.
was like N Diesel Media, right?
Yeah.
So that logo wasn't going to be selling any tickets. So I had to really sell based on my experience and what I had learned. And I found that the first few conferences I was being sold as former New York Times or former Time Inc. because they still needed that logo. Now that I've rebranded my company and I've figured out kind of my own way, I'm able to put those experiences and those case studies in a bigger context where I can say, here's what I've learned in working at these different companies and with all of these different brands. I may not be their representative anymore, but I have the collective experience of all these roles, all these projects that I can bring to the table and hopefully able to stand on my own a little bit more so that I don't necessarily need that big logo anymore. Not in my circles of the content marketing folks, which is a really great place to be.
Well, then elaborate if you a little bit will, because I was specifically going to ask you that question that about that transition from logo to Melanie. But
Yeah.
how did that impact your income as a speaker? I know so often, and I have this conversation with a lot of speaker groups, a lot of the content directors putting together speakers for conferences, and I've sent them a ton of speakers, and I'll tell them, wait, I don't care who XYZ sales manager at some big logo is.
Hmm.
Never heard of him. Interest me nothing. But if they haven't heard of who the people are that are actually moving the needle in, for this example, content marketing or whatever the field is,
Right.
that's if you're trying to learn something, that's the draw, not somebody that is sits behind a logo. Not that they're bad or
Right.
anything else. That's just a lot of brands don't have great logos. It's just used as not a tactics, not a proper way of saying it, but it's used as a way to bring in more sponsors, which is understandable, but it can also impact your income dramatically. So how did you
Oh yeah.
handle that transition with having a salary and benefits and maybe getting an honorarium as a speaker to, oh my God, we're jumping off a cliff without Thelma and we're going to try to make a living at this.
Yeah, it's definitely different. And it's funny because it's not in the way that people think. I think that from the outside world, as an attendee, you might assume that a speaker from Google or Facebook or Coca-Cola or whoever is bringing in the big bucks, when the
Yeah,
reality is those individuals are almost without fail speaking for free
right.
on behalf of their company. They are speaking there as a marketing tactic for whatever they do at their company, right? So their company, whoever that may be, is paying for their hotel, is paying for their travel, and is paying them their salary while they're there doing their speaking. When I worked for myself, I'm not paying for my own,
Right.
or it would be much more challenging for
And
me
Google's
to
not
pay for
paying
my
for you
own.
either.
Exactly. So, as an individual speaker, you don't have that kind of backing. So it then becomes a choice between, am I going to pay out of pocket for my own travel, hotel, etc. expenses and my own time being there? Or am I going to have that uncomfortable conversation where I say, I know I may have spoken for you for free in the past as a representative of this company, but I now am on my own and I know that I can deliver value to you, to your attendees, that I can help them walk away with something and enough information that they will be back next year and they will continue to come back because they've learned something valuable. You really have to switch from, I am a value for you as the event organizer,
Such a
right?
great
Because you
point.
can get me for free, versus I am a value for your attendees, that I am someone that's going to bring value for those people who are attending, and therefore it's worth your investment to bring me there. And some people don't want to make that switch. Some organizers would rather fill the agenda with free speakers because they're going to increase their profit margins. And I can't fault them for that, right? It's a business. Um, but there are a good number of them who are very focused on making sure that the value is there for the attendees. And if given the choice between investing in a speaker who will take their craft seriously and whose only goal is to deliver for my client, who is this audience, right? My goal is to make sure that I was worth the investment and I give them something they can take home and take action on, versus someone whose job is to represent their company and answer questions very carefully. I think that there are a lot of event organizers who are in that latter camp and would rather have someone like me who can speak freely, who can focus on their craft, who can share case studies from multiple companies and give a more diverse experience to the audience. So I think, to your point about sponsors, it does have to be a mix, right? I know that my company logo isn't going to convince someone to come on board as a landmark sponsor, and that's fine. But let's make sure we have a balance between people who can, bring value from a company perspective, bring value from an individual perspective, and kind of create an agenda that's going to overall achieve all those different objectives. And I don't envy the event organizers who have to make those calls, because it's got to be a tough line to walk.
Yeah, and it's not an easy problem to solve because you also can't blame the attendees with how they judge the speakers because I don't know,
Right.
they're not going to be seasoned enough to necessarily understand that. But if you get, 20 speakers and let's say you're the best one and know your craft, well, the other 19, for example, may not know, but they're not going to drop them, and give you a five and everybody else gets a two. It may be that
Right.
they were forced. And so as a whole, they don't look that far off to a lot of the conferences, but there's so many people that are in the event space that know events and they know managing the events. They may not know the craft of the attendees well, and it becomes just really hard for anybody to pull together. So that's why I always really like a lot of the conferences, especially where at least for example, if it's in marketing or advertising or something like that, where they or some specific business, they know their vertical, not just events
Hmm.
as a whole. It really becomes sort of a tight, path to navigate. So when you look at the mix though for you in your own speaking life, especially as you're out there independently with your company now, how do you look at balancing that resume as well to and I looked at your website, which has a lot of great events on there. I mean, I have watched the speech where you did at Content
Hmm.
Marketing World, for example, has a huge number of speakers every year, and they're not.
Huge.
I'm
Hundreds. Yeah.
assuming that they are not paying everybody to speak
They are
because
not.
it is a great opportunity. So how do you balance that mix of where? And I don't need to know if you spoke for a fee or not, but how do you look at going to a large event like that versus where it gets your name out there very largely
Yeah.
versus a small event which actually pays the bills. Maybe it's
So
200 people and you get a $5,000 honorarium for speaking at your local Rotary Club or something like that.
yeah, yeah, it's such an important question, and I'm going to be as open and honest as I can, because I think it's the only way that as an industry we can move forward, and as someone starting out, you can manage your expectations. So
Yeah.
most of the big events like that, content marketing world, social media marketing world, a lot of those big events, they don't pay honorariums, and the reason is because these events are large enough that they give you a platform that can be seen as valuable for you. So in my case, being at Content Marketing World, obviously, you saw that video, right? That was a great audience for me. I
Yeah.
got a lot of additional opportunities out of that, whether that's podcast interviews like this or, guest blog opportunities, additional speaking gigs. I have made the calculation that that event in particular, among several others, are worth it for me. What's not okay is the amount of events that will sell you as a speaker on the idea of exposure.
Yes.
Exposure in and of itself doesn't do anything for you, right? That's the really important thing to remember. Exposure is not necessarily valuable. What's valuable is the right kind of exposure with the right kind of people that leads to revenue, right? So if that exposure is not leading to revenue in some way, it's not actually valuable. So this is a calculation everyone will have to make for themselves. Um, what I also stress is that there are a lot of events that cannot offer you a cash value, but can offer you value in other ways. So, for example, I have done a number of gigs overseas, over in Europe, where for whatever reason, whatever sort of policies they have, they aren't able to meet my full speaking fee, but they do have more flexibility on travel. So they're able to do things like buy my husband a flight to come with me, so
Okay.
that he can come on this trip with me, right?
Yeah.
And give us 2 or 3 extra days in the hotel. So now I've been able to turn this into a trip for the two of us.
Yeah.
Maybe with the baby, that'll be a
Yeah.
little more
A
complicated now,
vacation that you
but
can write off.
exactly, right? So there's other ways you can add value. I've had events that can say, look, we can't necessarily meet your full fee, but we can meet it part way, and we can give you the raw video footage of your talk. Well, that's incredibly valuable. I think, how much would it cost for me to hire a videography team to show up and
Oh,
take video?
exactly.
That does have value, right? So there are a lot of other ways that you can kind of work with people who may not be able to meet your full fee, but can provide value, that you would other be spending on otherwise, right? So there is always that balance. The important thing for me is to just really track everything very carefully. And so that's one thing I would recommend if anyone is starting out in this speaking business or trying to evaluate how your time and money are being spent. Keep very detailed track of everything. Every gig that you do or that you have an inquiry for, you should be keeping track and ask the question, how did they find you? So, where are they learning about you from? Every opportunity, you need to be able to trace back to something, because that's how you're going to determine whether something is or is not worth your time in future iterations. So, for like I said, I've done social media marketing world and content marketing world enough to know that throughout the year I get enough additional business from people who were there in that room that it is worth my time. But if I wasn't tracking that, I wouldn't be able to know that. So the tracking, a system for tracking is really key for figuring out which gigs that are, air quotes for exposure, are actually turning into the kind of exposure that brings you revenue or not.
So at least from your business today as a marketer, consultant, and also as a speaker, has that been the most fruitful for you as you've made this transition over the last few years away from a brand? Has it been the masterminds? What's the thing that sort of excites you the most as you build out your own, business as part of StoryFuel?
Yeah, so I'll be, again, as transparent as I can be. About 50% of my revenue comes from speaking and speaking related activities. So that includes like workshops
Sure.
or anything where I'm going somewhere and delivering to an audience. And about 50% comes from consulting and more private projects that are less speaking oriented. So that's how I separate, um, the more consulting based stuff. When I look at some of the other, I would call them growing projects that I have. So that's things like the mastermind. I have a book coming out that, I'm sure will be some small part of that revenue. Affiliate deals and things like that. Those are all a much, much, much smaller portion of my overall income. Um, I think that it really tends to be about 50-50 between those two major buckets of the consulting like activities and the speaking like activities. And it has at times been 60-40, but it's been 60-40 in either direction just year to year. So it is something that I do split my time pretty equally between, because they contribute fairly equally to my bottom line. I think in an ideal world, I'd love to be doing even more of the speaking stuff, even more than the consulting, just because it does. I think I'm able to reach more people that way. And for me, I feel like I'm on an education based mission more so than a bottom line based mission. Um, I like to think about how many people I can reach and how many people I can help by sharing the things that I know and ways that they can change their business meaningfully. So I'd love to be able to get in front of bigger stages, bigger get in front of bigger audiences, and share that information with more people, which is part of why I've launched the online mastermind, because I'm not limited by geography in that way. And part of why I've been working on the book for the last couple months is because I want to be able to sort of unchain the limitations of who I can reach. There are only so many days in a year and only so many stages you can get on. So the more I can expand that impact, the more satisfying it is for me.
Well, and you mentioned earlier a lot of your speaking gigs now are coming from referrals, and most of it's inbound to you.
Yeah.
As you've seen that, have you also seen where paid gigs are being referred to you by speakers that know they're paid versus a lot of non-paid gigs where people think this will help give you the exposure? And the reason I ask is, do those groups of people sort of run in the same similar circles between paid and non-paid, if that makes sense.
It's so interesting. I think that generally speaking, the only people who make that distinction up front are fellow speakers.
Yeah, no, I get this a
Um,
lot. I get people, the same group of people refer me to paid
mhm.
gigs. They live in that swim lane, and a different group of people only refer me to non-paid gigs. That's their swim lane, and I appreciate both. But it's,
Yeah,
yeah, that's sad that we know that inside baseball.
it yeah, it is. Well, I think it's because again, people who are attendees, someone who says, "Oh, my company does a, employee development day and I think you'd be a great fit." That's coming from such a wonderful place. Like that's
Yes,
someone assessing your value and saying, "I think you deserve to be here. I want you in this space."
such a great point.
Um, but they're not doing it from a business
Yeah,
perspective. That's coming from their heart, more so in terms of your content. And that's a wonderful vote of confidence for me to say they believe my content is worthy of being there. um, they don't necessarily know the ins and outs of how those things are organized or what it
the
costs or
sausage
the
making
budget.
process.
Exactly, they have no clue. So I try not to hold it against them for the most part, or not take it personally,
Yeah,
if someone refers you for something that has no budget, because they probably didn't know a budget in the first place.
right.
um,
So you personally are not a 501c3.
no, no, and surprisingly, my rent cannot be paid in exposure, and
And
neither can any of my other bills. So
right, and likes and shares.
yeah, but and again, I think most people, if they are making that referral, it is genuinely like the assumption is not, I don't value your time and I think you should work for free.
Yeah,
I think it really is coming from a good place of
wonderful point.
hopefully this helps you in some way. Hopefully this is they they genuinely, when they're making a referral, they do believe they're doing something good. And so, if it doesn't work out ultimately, I want to make sure that they still feel appreciated, because the next one very well may be a wonderful opportunity that, even though there's no budget available, is a good fit. You know, the biggest example I always give is there are a lot of speakers who are vying to be on the TED or the TEDx stage. Yeah, right. That's sort of like a badge of honor in the speaking world to give a TED talk. Those are not paid, right? This is like
Exactly.
but the average person doesn't know that and would probably assume if you've done a TED talk that you were paid loads of money for that experience, right? There's a disconnect between how our industry actually functions financially and how it's perceived from the outside world. Again, you would think those big opportunities, those big stages are where all the big money is, or those big name speakers from large companies are the ones getting all the payment. And that's almost the exact opposite of how this industry tends to work. It's the quiet gigs and the private gigs and the smaller gigs that have those bigger budgets generally, right? The more internal stuff, the stuff that you're not going to find on social media, tends to be where we're paying the bills.
How long did it take you as a marketer slash speaker? How long did it take you to build up your known value to people and attendees and referrals and everything else
Mm,
to where they started coming to you with business? I mean, for a lot of people, we're talking years and years and years. That's another thing that a lot of people don't know is that
yeah,
not everybody up there has been speaking 10 years and not everybody up there has been a year. It's a mix. And so it can also really be a mix for how long it takes you to develop that into a consultancy business, helping people
mm,
do storytelling.
yeah. So I mean, I can. There's a lot of different ways you can sort of evaluate that. I can do it first in terms of finances. So I
Yeah,
can tell you that um, my business has been profitable, since its first year. It took me my first year. I replaced my initial corporate salary, so I was able to get back up to what I had lost within the
right.
first 12 months, which was a really big mark of pride for me. So that was a good signal. Um, that I was at least able to find work. What I can tell you is it was not all the kind of work that I wanted to do. So being at a point where I was working really very closely to my swim lane, to my expertise,
Hmm.
and still being profitable took a little bit longer, right? Where I could kind of cut out some of the less applicable work and clients and hone in on the more applicable work and clients. Took about 2 years. Um, I doubled my revenue in year two, and I doubled it again in year three. This year has been a very sharp decline because I took almost half a year
Yeah,
off, so it's pretty hard to maintain
that
at that
happens.
point. But it's still very respectable. I'm still very proud. Knowing that I was able to bring in what I did in only half a year is still makes me proud of the work that we do. Um, I would say that my another way that I would evaluate whether I'm my value is being known. I think is really the way that you phrase the question is. I think it was by a year and a half I started to get a lot more referrals that were coming from the referrals were coming from people who were seeing me speak.
Yes.
And to me, that's the biggest compliment. And I think it's a fellow speaker friend of mine, Andrew Davis, says, your best piece of business is a referable speech. The best marketing you can do is have an amazing speech. Because if you step on stage in front of 200 prospects and you knock it out of the park, and if you're converting any number of those people who are in the audience into future attendees, or getting more business out of that, that's really the best thing you can do for yourself as a speaker. So as scary as it is to have so much of my business dependent on inbound, on referrals and things, to me that is the biggest compliment. That people could not just believe me when I'm pitching, but see my work and then believe that it's worthy of a referral or an introduction, or being invited back. That's the biggest thing to me. So I think it was maybe a year and a half in, I had honed my craft enough. I was, focusing on the material, on the design of my slides, on, working with coaches to improve my breath and my pacing and my blocking and staging, that I was routinely being rated as a top speaker, that I was getting, 4.8 out of 5, attendee evaluations, that I was getting introductions and invited back. And so for me, hitting that point of saying, I think I really have a referable speech. My work is speaking for me now. And that took about a year and a half, I think.
Yeah, and it really takes a lot. I think another thing people don't logistically think when you're up on stage, it's not like everybody's just sending you an email right there saying, we need to hire you to do some business right there. Logistically, you hope you can walk off stage and get a few minutes with people, or they're not rushed, or maybe they're too shy, or whatever else that happens. Maybe they forget to send you a LinkedIn request later. It's just you can make a really great connection with people on stage, but sometimes it's logistically can be difficult sometimes to connect with them afterwards if they're not
Well,
pronounced
yeah,
enough to go come reach you later.
and this is also a very long tail business. I can tell you that
Exactly.
even just this week, I got an email that said, hey, I hope you remember me. You spoke at our event back in 2015. Well, and some new opportunity has come up. We're talking about a 4-year
Yeah.
delay.
Yeah.
I mean, almost nearly 5 years since I last worked with this person. And they're able to reach back out and share an opportunity now. So, you made the point earlier about putting in the work and it taking years. um, you know, Speaking of transitions, maybe it's good for us to have this conversation again in 6 months once I've emerged from the other side of
Yeah.
maternity leave. And I can tell you if it was easy to build back up again, because I'm not fully there yet. I'm still going through it as we speak.
There you go. I've done plenty of part 2 episodes now, so I welcome that. But how do you look at keeping up to speed with where you are in your craft today versus juggling all the stuff that goes into being a speaker? Now, I know I heard on that other podcast where you also use the virtual assistant, but you've got to still
Hmm.
be you got to stay up to speed, even in content marketing and storytelling, not necessarily with the newest hacks and tips and tricks and that kind of stuff, but there's still that part of your craft you've got to stay focused on, other than just juggling speaking and masterminds and other things to help pay the bills.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think there's a couple things packed in there. I mean, number one is we don't want to become speakers who just speak and not speakers who do, right? To your point, we need case studies, we need new examples, we need the new research to be able to cite. And so for that, there's really not much other there's not much you can do other than actually be active in the work. And
Exactly.
so I think whether that is continuing to consult, or being a part of mastermind groups, being a part of networking events, going to conferences yourself, attending and listening to other sessions, working with clients, talking to your contemporaries in the industry, you have to stay up to speed. Your material and your knowledge base can become stale so quickly if you don't focus on actually doing the work. So I try my best to stay mentally active, working with clients, talking to my colleagues, so that I'm up to speed. Um, the other thing, just in terms of juggling, coming back to one of the very first things I talked about, is asking for help. So, having a virtual assistant on board is absolutely vital for me, helping me to manage my calendar and book my travel and find new opportunities for me to apply to, all kinds of things. I don't know. Her name is Laura, and I don't know what I would do without Laura. She kind of keeps everything running. So find your Laura, find someone who's
Yeah.
going to help you keep everything running, who's going to be able to help you with the things that you need to have done to make sure you're able to do your best work. So finding someone that can help with all those things is absolutely key. Um, and the last point there is just to start saying no a little more strategically.
Yes.
And that might sound counterintuitive, but that is probably one of the things I've learned most since having a baby is that I only get so many hours now. My work number of working hours has been reduced, and so what I choose to fill those hours with, I now need to be a little bit more careful about what I say yes to, and what I'm willing to be away from home for. What I'm willing to leave her for 4 days to be away from home
Right.
for. That bar has risen a little
Alexa, find me a Laura.
bit.
Nothing. All right. Well, Melanie, you live in New York where there are a lot of different kinds of sharks. You're on a shark's perspective with a guy named Shark. So I got to ask, what is your favorite kind of shark and why?
I don't know if I know enough about sharks to have a strong preference.
It can be
Um,
it can be baby shark, it could be Shark Tank shark, it could be
oh man.
Bruce
Well,
from
with the new baby in the
Jaws.
house, I have a feeling it's going to be baby shark very soon.
There you go.
Uh, it's probably the shark that's going to get the most fanfare in our house.
Fair enough. Well, Melanie, it's that special time of the show. Are you ready for the 5 most interesting and important questions you're going to be asked today?
Yes, let's do it.
All right. Number one, as a speaker who's traveling to events at many airports, you should know this one. And also as a decaf coffee lover that I read you were. Starbucks or Seattle's best?
Starbucks.
Yeah, I would agree.
Okay.
There's not a lot of neighborhood coffee shops inside, Hartsfield Airport or LaGuardia. So, number
Mm-hmm.
number two, another odd thing that I read about you that may make sense when you hear this: granite tile or travertine.
Ooh, I think granite tile.
I've never heard of anybody having a tile flooring obsession, so I thought that was interesting.
I just it's just something that I think gets so overlooked, and so much art, artistry and craftsmanship goes into tile floors. I try to, like the mosaic tile
Yeah.
floors. I'm a big
All right. Number three, journalist or marketer.
fan. I'd like to think I'm still a journalist at heart.
Okay. Fair enough. Number four, it's a diesel question, but a little bit different diesel. Vin Diesel in Fast and the Furious 1 back in 2001 or The Fate of the Furious in 2017?
I gotta go back to the original.
Yeah, gotta. All right, Melody, and the most important question, number five, that you're going to be asked today is biscuits or cornbread?
Ooh, biscuits. I think
All right, good response. So, Melanie, where can people
appropriate for Thanksgiving.
exactly? So, where can people find out more about you, learn about your story and the fuel behind it, if you will? How about that for a plug? Learn about what you're doing and where you're speaking and more.
Yeah, if you want to learn more about what I'm up to, see where I'm speaking, get the lowdown on my forthcoming book, you can go to storyfuel.co. So it's .co, not .com. But storyfuel.co, you'll find all the info there, upcoming events, how to work with me, upcoming masterminds you may be able to join, all kinds of fun stuff over at storyfuel.co. And if you look for me on social, I am Melanie Deziel, Deziel. You will find me whatever network is your favorite.
Melanie, thank you so much for being with us today on A Shark's Perspective.
Thanks for letting me share my story.
So there was my conversation with Melanie Deziel, the founder of StoryFuel, an international keynote speaker, a lifelong storyteller, and recognized as one of the world's leading experts in native advertising and branded content. Let's take a look at 3 key takeaways from my conversation with her. First, everyone loves a cute baby. Talk about a talk trigger. Mothers have such a tough job anyway, but it's really hard sometimes for people to find help when you need it. Hard to believe there aren't an abundance of blogs for speakers/expectant mommies. And for the rest of us, maybe it's not pregnancy, but sometimes, just like it did for me on multiple occasions, life just got in the way. And I've changed my own speaking path several times in the last decade. Not everything is Googleable on how-tos. So normally I don't encourage people to write yet another blog, but I'll make this exception. These are unique problems, so help people solve them if you know how with your own experience. Second, so for a lot of people attending conferences, here's a little secret. A lot of people from big brands are not always the experts or expert speakers. And most of the times, they're not paid. But big logos sell sponsorships for conferences with these big brand names. But attendees are there generally to learn. Look, not everyone from a super cool brand is truly a thought leader, or even a great speaker for that matter. And yes, there are plenty of exceptions. If I see a big brand person as a speaker, then I really want to see if they offer something other than sales babble. And that's rare. Or they aren't great presenters and I'm bored to tears after 45 minutes. I learned this also when going from brand agency consultant. I didn't get dumber when I went to work for an agency, but it's more difficult for speakers when event planners don't see that billion-dollar brand associated with your name because they think that's the value of you as a speaker, or maybe it's the value to the sponsorships anyway. A lot of us who get paid often to speak bring non-sales experience as marketers so that you can get better at your craft as well, not just buy those other products and services. So it can be different explaining the investment in paying for a speaker versus those sales folks, but it is well worth it if you want a thought leader to help your audience. Love the way Melanie positions it when she says, I'm a value for you, the conference, or I'm a value for your attendees. It's a great distinction. And as she said, some organizers look at it only with free speakers because of the business of it. My advice, don't get caught up in brand logos only. Look for the ones that can help you learn. After all, you're spending the money for a conference pass, so let them know it. You want the best speakers. Third, for most speakers, small shows pay the bills. Large shows help you get your name out there, and they're great for the SEO of it, if you will. You can leverage a lot of those bigger shows, as all of us have. And it makes sense for her to speak at Social Media Marketing World or any to some of those similar well-known big brands because it's a major name on your resume. Look, you may talk to the most awesome people you've ever met at the Knights of the Chamber of Rotary Club Meetup Marketing School Masterclass. How's that for a made-up name? But it doesn't move the needle for many event planners or people considering to hire you. However, when you say some of these more well-known events, well, it's like you got called up to the big leagues, so you must be good. I still find it amusing, even when it works for me, but hey, it works. Regardless of the size of the show, it's still up to you as a speaker to go kill it. Got a question? Send me an email to kenneth@asharksperspective.com. Thank you for the privilege of your time. Be well and let the shark be your spirit animal. Keep swimming and join us on the next episode of A Shark's Perspective.